So if you're waiting for the interest rates to hit 3% to buy a house, stop waiting. I'm going to tell you why that's not going to happen, and we're starting right now. Hey y'all, welcome to this episode of Your Wichita Falls. I'm Debbie Dobbins, your host for this episode, and as those of you who watch this channel know, I'm a real estate entrepreneur here in Wichita Falls. I do all things real estate, and I talk about Wichita Falls because I love it. If you're not a subscriber, I would love for you to subscribe to our channel, ring that bell, and you'll be notified every time we upload a new video, which is on Mondays and Thursdays. So let's get started. I hear all the time people are waiting for the interest rates to get back to 3%. And we're going to have this pivot from the Fed, and rates are going to come down. And trust me when I say rates are going to come down, and the Fed is going to pivot. That is going to happen. However, getting to 3%, even in the low twos or the high twos, is just crazy. So I just want to give you a little more perspective, and I've done this in a couple of different ways, but let's talk about it from this perspective. Last year, the Federal Reserve took action to try to bring inflation down. Okay, if you're living under a rock, you don't know that. But if you're not living under a rock, you know the Federal Reserve has done this thing, and I've done a video on the Federal Reserve and their blunt instrument, the hammer, of raising interest rates to try to bring inflation down. And that's already happening in spades. I mean, as a matter of fact, we're going into a recession. But in the response to those efforts, the mortgage rates have jumped up. And I've explained this before. The Fed overnight lending rate, which banks lend between themselves, which then affects everything else, does not drive mortgage interest rates. It does not. What drives the mortgage interest rates is the bond market. But regardless, the bond market is taking their cue from the Fed. And what's kind of funny is the Fed and the bond market are like two fighting siblings, and we're waiting to see who's going to win, because the bond market is looking at what the economy is doing, and they're pricing in that the Fed is going to pivot sooner than later, and the Fed is kind of being like the big bad brother saying, no, we're going to keep on this trajectory, which is very kind of hilarious. But in the end, the recession will win out. I promise you. Regardless, the mortgage interest rates have jumped up rapidly. Holy moly. They've raised rates more than ever in the history of the Fed this last year. They've jumped up so dramatically from these record lows that we saw in 2021, peaking at basically just over 7% last October. So October was kind of the highest, and we've leveled out a little bit. It's not as horrific as it was right then in October. So what happened was, all you hopeful buyers, when the market decided to take a pivot, which meant the value started to flatten, but then your purchasing power was taken away from you because these interest rates were just like sucker punch, one after another. So what happened in, like the last 6 months or so, so many buyers have just decided to press pause on your plans. Frankly, my opinion is it's because of fear, that this unknowingness of what's about to happen. No matter how many times I can share with you what the history has shown, what the economy is showing, where we're going, how you can mitigate it, people still are now in this holding pattern. So I've done a video on rent and how much it's going to cost you to rent. Even if you buy a house and you pay a higher interest rate, you're still going to be better off. But I digress. Today, the rate of inflation is starting to drop. I've just watched more economic reports, and it's just actually kind of sad that the Fed is still holding strong. It's almost like the Eastern culture where they lose face if they admit that they need to stop. Because, and frankly, I know what's going to happen is if they did start to pivot and say that out loud, the bond market would rally, and that would make them very unhappy. I think it's like teenagers a lot of times, the bond market, the Fed, all of this. But because inflation is dropping and it doesn't come down like a stone, because they've been hammering and hammering and hammering and hammering, the thing is that recession is starting to take a toll. So if you have any money in the stock market, you already know that. Money in crypto. Oh my gosh, look at what's happening to crypto. Google just laid off 12,000 people. Microsoft just laid off 10,000 people. So all of that will have a delayed impact on the overall economy. But that being said, the recession, we haven't really even entered it yet. I mean, it's an early recession, but the thing is that the Fed has to pivot at that point. So because inflation is dropping, the mortgage rates have begun to drip below last year's peak. And as I said, what's interesting is that the bond market controls that. So the bond market can see what's happening. It's just the Fed that's kind of like on the Late Show. So the bond market can see what's happening, and the rates have just begun to dip slightly, which is really good news for buyers. But the thing is that it's going to be even more in a very short time. I promise you. I'm predicting spring. Some people are saying 2024. I don't, or maybe late 2023. I think it's way sooner than that. But, you know, what do I know? I've just been doing this for 30 years. But there's a chief economist at Freddie Mac. He says, while mortgage market activity has significantly shrunk over the last year, that's what's happened, is there's been a slowdown. And the reason that the market was so overheated last 2 years was because there was no inventory. Well, guess what? Now there's too much inventory. So it's supply and demand, supply and demand, supply and demand. But significantly, the market has shrunk over the last year, and inflationary pressures are now easing. So that's the good news. The bad news is that they're easing slowly, because that's what it takes when you use a hammer. It doesn't go fast. And I've used that analogy of building a house with only a hammer. It doesn't go as fast as if you had power tools and a whole lot of things, which could be helpful, which, I don't know, balancing the economy might be one of those. But that easing is going to lead to lower interest rates in 2023. And Freddie Mac has already said that. I say it, everyone is saying it. Everyone is saying it. But the thing is that the consumer doesn't get it, because you're watching mainstream news. Turn that off. You're watching mainstream news and it's scaring you, and it's fear-mongering. So I'm all about knowing what's actually happening and being positive and using all of that information to help me make my decisions more appropriate. So potentially great news if you're a buyer, hello, aiming to jump into the market, which I recommend that everybody do. And sooner rather than later, because as I said, I think we're going to see the rates come down in an upsurge right around the corner in the next 6 months. And we're not going to have a crazy market like we did, but the housing prices are going to start to escalate. You know, they're going to tick up. I know maybe escalate's a bad word. But you want to get into the housing market, any drop in mortgage rates helps boost your purchasing power. So there's that. You want to stay focused on what's happening with these interest rates. And as I said, I do mortgages and I do 2-1 buy downs and all kinds of things to help you bring down that interest rate for the period of time between now and when the rates actually do go down, and then you just refinance. But when you bring down your expected monthly mortgage payment, this is good news for your overall budget. So keep in mind, there's lots of ways to do that right now. You don't have to wait. We're not going to get to 3%, but let's just say that the interest rates are 6% right now, and you do a 2-1 buy down, you started at 4, you're pretty darn close to 3. This means that those mortgage rates, those lower mortgage rates that the experts are forecasting, me included, this year could be just what you need to reignite your home buying goals. And as I said, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait. That's the good news. But this opens up a window of opportunity for you, because you should not expect rates to drop back down to 3%. So I just want to put that out there. That's how we started this video. If we got to the 4s, that's an absolute still. Before the craziness of this historical period of time that we went with all of the perfect storm of COVID and millennials coming in and no housing and inventory not there, that was as I said, a perfect storm. Prior to that, 4.5% were historical lows. So if we can get you into a mortgage for 4.5, even 5%, woohoo! You're still way ahead of the game. You're not going to get to 3 unless you do a buy down at 5%. And I'm just confident that we're not going to get to 3s unless we have a huge recession and the market takes a huge hit, which none of us want. And so all the experts agree that that's not the range that you should bank on, because literally it's just not feasible again. The Fed funds rate had to be at 0 for us to be at 3%. They're not going back there. They have no intention of that. But Greg McBride, he's a chief financial analyst at Bankrate. He explains it this way. I think we could be surprised at how much these mortgage rates pull back this year. Yay! I say it over and over, but we're not going back to 3, he says. Anytime, soon. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. Inflation is not going back to 2%, and that's where the Fed would love it to be. But also, I've done videos on the Fed does not understand what the inflation really is at this point because there's such a mixed bag. And I really think they need to reconsider how they're determining inflation. The couple of things that are in that CPI is housing and shelter, which rent is in there. So I've done a video on how much rents have gone up, and it's an unrealistic place that we're not coming back from. But food and fuel are also huge. Those are components that I'm telling you, I don't see any foreseeable future where those are going to come back down. They're only going to continue to go up. You've heard that saying, once something goes up, it doesn't come back down. Not throwing, but anyways, it's important for you to have a realistic vision for what you can expect this year. And that's where the advice of an amazing expert real estate advisor comes in, which is me. You'd be surprised with the impact even a minor drop in mortgage rates has on your budget. So if you want to know how you want to look at that, it's really a simple equation. For every $100,000 you lower your interest rate or raise your interest rate 2%, it's basically a translation of $100. So if you have a $100,000 purchase or refinance and the rate is 2% different, either way, it's $100. If it's $200,000, it's $200. If it's $300,000, it's $300. So if you take that and it's 1%, it's $50. So what I think people get very confused with is that they think it's so dramatic. Now, granted, over the past year, it's been dramatic, but this decrease and increase could substantially give you a difference in a payment that may or may not be that much in your budget, especially given how much your rent may be going on. So if you're ready to buy a home now, today's market presents the opportunity to get a more affordable mortgage rate. I'm telling you, things are better than what the news is telling you. So your dream home is right around the corner, and the good news is you face less competition from other buyers. That's the really good news. That's the headline here, is that once again, we have an abundance of properties on the market, and it is now a buyer's market. So if you really want to get back into looking at buying a house, and this pullback in mortgage rates is great news for you, but you have just been holding out for 3%, 86 that. Look, there's so many opportunities for you out there right now, and I would love to be able to help you explore all of the options that you have available to you, because there is a multiplicity of them. And it really is the best thing you can do for yourself is to become a homeowner, and the best thing you can do for your family is to have that security of being in a home that you own and build equity and wealth. So there's a link in the first comments below to schedule a Zoom meeting with me if you're so inclined. And I would love to share more about this with you. There's 2 more videos coming up. And as I always say, y'all come back now. You hear? Bye-bye.